Hello everyone, I'm Aaron, a birding naturalist. Welcome to my channel. Let's talk about doing that. Playbacks while you're birding. Using playbacks is actually a bit of a controversial topic in the birding world, and I want to talk about it so that we can kind of get some information out there so that we can all bird in the most responsible, respective, sustainable, ethical way possible. So first off, let's talk about a definition, just to like frame the question. What are we talking about when it comes to playbacks? Well, it's doing exactly what I just did there, taking a recording device or a speaker and a playback device of some kind out into the field to where there are birds and playing the sounds of birds of some kind in the hopes of getting a response from a bird. Now, what's the point? Why would anybody do this? Why is this controversial at all? Well, there's certainly some pros to doing this. You know, when you're looking at pros and cons, the pros are oftentimes if you can do this, you play a recording of a bird call, the bird hears it, comes in towards you, and you get some incredibly great looks at a bird. You have amazing wildlife encounters, and that's certainly probably the biggest pro. Another one is limiting habitat disturbance to a certain extent. You can imagine if the options are to stand at the edge of a habitat and play a recording into a habitat and have the bird kind of come to the edge or come out of that habitat to where you are. That would be a certain amount of disturbance, but maybe less than if you went into the habitat and were crashing around, disturbing the vegetation, disturbing other birds, messing up the habitat. This would be especially true if you're in a birding group. You know, if there are a dozen people, it might be much less of a disturbance to play a recording, have the bird come out, have all 12 people see the bird, rather than have all 12 people go into the habitat crashing around and disturbing the vegetation and the other birds and everything. So, limiting habitat disturbance is another potential pro. But what about the cons? Well, I mean, if you think about it, if I play a recording into a habitat at a bird, and a bird hears it, and that bird then responds, that bird is then using up its energy, that it could be using for other things, for preening feathers, for caring for young, for defending its territory against actual bird threats. It's using up energy that it could be doing for all the other things that birds do in their lives. And instead, spending that energy responding to a threat or a challenge or a stimulus, basically, that isn't real. And alongside that, you know, using up energy to respond to a stimulus that isn't real, also using up time. That is, again, time that bird could be spent using it, doing anything else that birds do. So the cost of energy, the cost of time are both significant. And also there's the issue of exposing it to predation. I mean, if I'm standing at the edge of a habitat and I play this recording and the bird comes out of hiding, out into sort of a more exposed area, certainly I can get a good look at it. That's lovely. But so could potential predators. So you're exposing this bird to potentially increased chances of predation. And all those things can increase stress, which is another con. Using up energy, using up time, exposing it to predation, all are potentially causes of stress in a bird's life. And so by playing a recording, birders might be increasing the level of stress that birds feel. Another con is that it could kind of annoy other birders. can imagine a situation where, if someone is in a habitat looking for a bird that they really want to see, and they hear the call of that bird somewhere across these bushes, and they're very excited. They're like, oh, I've got the bird, finally. And they go around to investigate. And it turns out that it's another birder with a speaker playing the recording of that bird and not actually the bird. That can be irritating. So bothering and annoying other birders is another potential con to playbacks. And finally, another con is that, especially when dealing with sensitive species, if there are too many playbacks used, right? If I come and find a bird and play a bird call at it and it responds, and then 5 minutes later the next birder shows up at the same spot looking for this bird and plays a call and the bird responds, and then 10 minutes after that another birder shows up and plays a call looking for this bird, the bird responds, that doing this over and over and over and over again can actually drive a bird out of an area. They can make the decision that, you know what, this is not a good area, this is just too much harassment, too much annoyance, and they're leaving. So that's certainly another important con to using playbacks. And so I think if you take all of those and kind of in a bundle, you can kind of find some guidelines. And this is guidelines if you decide to use playbacks at all. And many people just make the decision that they are never going to use this. They are never going to bother a bird this way. And I think that's a legitimate decision. I'm not going to tell anybody that they should use them. I'm not going to tell anyone that they shouldn't, but as long as they do so sort of respectfully and responsibly. And what that means is playbacks shouldn't be super loud. You should not be blasting sounds into the environment. You should figure out where the bird you're hoping to find is likely to be and play it a recording that's loud enough to be heard in that area, but not really beyond that area. Another thing is it should be short. Using a playback that is many minutes long and saturating the environment with sound and sound and sound is also probably not a great idea, not a really ethical birding principle. A playback should be just long enough to attract the bird's attention and then really no longer. So it should be short. So relatively quiet, short. Also, playbacks really should not be used in areas that maybe have a kind of celebrity bird, a rare bird that has shown up someplace and that lots of the birding community has heard about and everyone wants to see and everyone wants to go and check out. That's the kind of situation where you get that, one birder comes, plays a recording, and then 5 minutes later, and then 10 minutes later, and then 5 minutes later, and then there's just this constant stream of birders playing recordings and bothering a bird. So if an area has a special bird for some reason, or if it's just a really popular birding area, and so there's just gonna be a lot of birder traffic, that's probably a place where everyone should sort of communally reduce playbacks and maybe not use them. And I think sort of those guidelines help with the decision of if you're going to use them at all in those sort of unusual circumstances, what thoughts maybe should be included in the delivery of that playback. Now, there are definitely a couple of important notices about playbacks when they should absolutely not be used at all. One is in terms of listed species. So species that are listed under the Endangered Species Act. And I would caution you to avoid species listed under the US Federal Endangered Species Act and also under the California State Endangered Species Act. Don't harass these birds. So listed as in threatened or endangered, there is specific language in these laws that say that take is illegal, and take includes harassment and calls, stimulating calls, playbacks can count as harassment. So it is not allowed to use playbacks for any species that is listed. Another thing to be aware of where sometimes you cannot use playbacks are in particular parks or nature areas. There are specific state parks, national parks, whatever, open spaces that actually specifically prohibit the use of playbacks in all or parts of their areas. And so that's definitely something to be aware of, kind of know before you go. If you're going to an area that says no playbacks allowed, don't use playbacks there. So I think with these guidelines, we can hopefully use playbacks in a responsible way if we're going to use them at all. And it's definitely something important to consider when you're making the decision of whether or not you are going to use a playback in any given situation. I mean, technology is advancing more and more so that we're all able to take higher quality and higher volume sounds into the environment with us. And so it's only going to grow, this technology and playbacks are only going to grow as an impact, as a facet, as a consideration that we have to take into account as birders when we go out into the field going into the future. And so knowing what the challenges are, knowing what the pros are, knowing what the cons are, become really important for us to all keep in mind so that we can all bird in such a way that is as beneficial as possible to birds and birding as a whole. So I hope that is useful information. I hope that is some information that we can all keep in mind when we're all deciding whether or not to use playbacks in the field. Thank you very much for the view. I hope you enjoyed this video. Subscribe to the channel, and until next time, enjoy the natural world.